Hey friends, it's Melvin. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Here's just a few quick things I wanted to notify you guys about before we get started. First up, very soon, new episodes will be releasing Wednesday mornings rather than Tuesday. So don't panic if you don't see a new episode on Tuesday. Just wait a little longer and you'll see it in your feed. Second, we've introduced a mailbag. Check those show notes and toward the bottom you'll see a mailbag link. You'll then be able to text us any questions you might have about movies, the movie industry, or any movie/Christian related questions you might have. Then we'll respond in a future episode, so send us your questions now. Up next, Patreon polls, which are available to Patreon supporters at the $3 tier or higher, have been updated. Supporters can now suggest films or shows to be reviewed at the end of each month. The two most liked submissions will become the options for the Patreon poll, so if you want to hear us talk about your favorite movie or show, join our Patreon and start campaigning. And lastly, whether you're a new or longtime listener, please consider writing a review or rating the Cinematic Doctrine podcast on iTunes and Spotify. Apart from financially supporting on Patreon, these are the two most helpful ways to support the show. And that's it. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to Trailer Talk, a monthly segment on Cinematic Doctrine where my co-host Dan and I talk about trailers that released during the previous month. For this episode, we look at the month of December and talk about No Time to Die, the latest James Bond film, Ghostbusters Afterlife, and the concept of a franchise giving fans what they want, Black Widow and our patient expectations, Wonder Woman 1984, and how I'm growing tired of 80s nostalgia, Mulan, and whether or not its quality can overshadow its controversy, and the teaser trailer for A Quiet Place Part 2. You can check out all of these trailers before we start talking about them on the Cinematic Doctrine website. A link will be provided in the show notes. This episode was recorded December 19th, so toward the end, you'll hear us sharing our predictive thoughts about the end of 2019 as far as movies are concerned, and you get to see if what we thought might happen, well, happened. Not only that, you get to hear our thoughts on the homogenization of film, and Daniel tasking you, the listener, with some homework. If you enjoy the show, be sure to check out Cinematic Doctrine's other offerings, like monthly movie news or our regular movie reviews. Leave a review on your respective podcast app, or feel free to support the show monetarily through Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can influence the show. Or, you don't have to. That's cool too. We're just glad you're here. And if you want to keep up with Daniel, you can follow him on Twitter at TomRonda1. That's an H after the R. All of this will be available in the show notes. Without further ado, let's talk some trailers.
Okay, so our first trailer this week is No Time to Die. 5 years after the capture of Ernst Blofeld, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, James Bond has left active service. He is approached by Felix Leiter, his friend and a CIA officer, who enlists his help in the search for a missing scientist. When it becomes apparent that the scientist was abducted, Bond must confront a danger the likes of which the world has never seen before. No Time to Die is the 25th official film in the venerable James Bond franchise, and also marks Daniel Craig's final outing in the titular role. The trailer is what you'd expect from James Bond trailer: chase scenes, practical-looking stunts, and exciting action set pieces. Bond is seen confronting shadowy figures from his past, including Spectre villain Ernst Blofeld, who is once again played by Christoph Waltz, and Dr. Madeline Swan is love interest from Spectre, played by Léa Seydoux once again. We're also introduced to Lashana Lynch as Nomi, a new 00 agent who has come on the scene since Bond has retired. Overall, I'm excited for a new Bond. I think Craig has been great in this role. I thought he brought a lot of gravity and seriousness back to the part after Brosnan had a more over-the-top approach to Bond. And so far, the Craig Bond films have ranged from great, such as Skyfall and Casino Royale, to at least entertaining. Also, at one point, Danny Boyle was attached to direct, and I thought that would be really interesting for a James Bond film. But as someone who's generally speaking enjoyed Daniel Craig as Bond, I'm both excited and somewhat disappointed to see him go, but I'd rather he leave the role gracefully than stay way too long. But Melvin, what are you thinking? Are you a James Bond fan? Did you enjoy this trailer? Are you sad and or excited to see Daniel Craig go?
Something about this trailer I thought that was kind of cool was just how it portrayed enough information to me to know what's going on, but then also wasn't cool because it seemed like in the middle of the trailer it was really confused about how it should try to convey the information. It had like a lot of empty space, and I was like, okay, why is this 2.5 minutes? Just give me a teaser trailer. Anyways, the reason I said that though and like not talked about James Bond is because I haven't watched any James Bond movies. So
Okay.
like and I actually must admit I don't really go out of my way to watch action thriller films. I really can't speak too much about like expectations when it comes to this trailer. I will say though that I think it was like there's shot composition in the film that looks really good. Like even just in the beginning when Bond is having that conversation with, I guess that's his love interest. There's like something about the way it's shot and like frames his head that I was like, I really love the depth here. And so I'm like, at the very least, it's going to be a very visually pleasing film, but maybe one I don't see because I haven't like seen a single James Bond film. So
Man, that kills some of my hope for discussion in regards to Bond.
sorry.
If you think this movie is visually interesting, I highly recommend that you check out the rest of the recent Craig Bond films. Sam Mendes is just incredible at what he does. Skyfall is just a visual treat. I mean, you could probably not watch any of the other Bond films, but Skyfall was meant to be sort of a celebration of James Bond, like as a franchise, and there's a lot in there that sort of talks about just how tired the franchise itself is and how Bond is sort of a relic from a past time and whether or not James Bond should even exist anymore, which is a level of self-introspection that will always sort of land with me. I like movies, especially ones in long-running series that sort of are a meditation on the series itself. I think the Daniel Craig Bond films have done a great job of hitting this middle ground between being like crowd-pleasing action films while still sort of retaining some of the spy elements that Bond is known for. But while watching the trailer, my first thought was, does a world where we have Mission Impossible need James Bond? Because when you watch a Mission Impossible, especially the recent ones, they are just absurd, over-the-top action films that it's basically a Fast and Furious movie with more seriousness, and people actually seem to want to make a good movie in them. And in that world where you see like Tom Cruise basically is on this weird hellbent mission to kill himself on a film set at some point in his life, does a movie where you just sort of see James Bond rappel off of a bridge like land anymore? And that's sort of been the interesting thing about James Bond, if you don't mind me sort of ranting for a second, which is that the James Bond franchise has always seemed to be in this weird place of trying to catch up. Like Moonraker, which came out, was sort of their attempt to sort of match Star Wars very unsuccessfully. I don't know if, I mean, you just said you've never seen a James Bond movie, but Moonraker is definitely one to skip. That movie is absolutely absurd. James Bond in space. That's all you need to know. And then in the two Pierce Brosnan films, they were trying to sort of match what was happening with like extreme sports and Triple X. And there were scenes where James Bond was like jet skiing and doing all these ridiculous stunts. And then the Bourne movies came out and sort of made James Bond look silly. And so James Bond has always been this weird franchise where it's simultaneously very respected, but always seemingly trying to mirror what the rest of Hollywood is doing, which is sort of the natural thing that's going to happen when you have a character that's been around as long as James Bond has. It's kind of refreshing to see that James Bond isn't like putting on their version of an Iron Man suit, or he's not like, they're not attempting to create like this big giant mythos that so many franchises are doing in this world. There's something kind of nice about James Bond just being like, okay, we're a James Bond movie. We're just going to keep doing our thing. And even if I think Skyfall tried to mirror what you like, Javier Bardem is the villain of Skyfall, and he's very clearly kind of their version of like a Joker, like mad genius character, where like no matter what you do, it's part of his big plan anyway. But so I don't know. There's something charming about James Bond still doing James Bond in this day and age. So I'm interested. I'll see it. You don't seem particularly enticed by this one. I don't know.
But like you said, if this film's just gonna like stick to being a James Bond film, like a James Bond film, then that's cool. I mean, I haven't seen anything as campy as miniguns coming out of your headlights, so that's pretty cool. I think the only other reservation too is talking about, does the world need a James Bond, is interesting, especially when like classic James Bond is toxic, he sleeps around, it has a horrible depiction of women. I mean, I won't even repeat the name of one of the James Bond movies. I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about. Let's just say it's like it's a play on words for a particular sea animal. Yeah, it's just so like as far as like a world that has a James Bond, there's almost like, what's the point?
It's like, it's interesting you're talking about like James Bond as a character who's so sleazy and just, I mean, just bluntly, he's very sexist. One of the screenwriters for the movie, Phoebe Mary Waller-Bridge, she's the second ever woman to ever have a writing credit in a James Bond film, was actually being interviewed about this very topic. And she said something interesting, which is, it's James Bond. Like, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but like, it's James Bond. You have to write James Bond as James Bond. it's really the rest of the movie's responsibility to try and portray women like respectfully. The movies themselves don't have to keep putting women in these positions. Like the movies themselves don't have to write women who are just going to be like, Bond, I will sleep with you. Like James Bond is going to be James Bond. He's going to be saying like cheesy one-liners. He's going to be hitting on every woman with a pulse. But the movie doesn't have to give him women who are going to like react the way that women in the past has. So hopefully going forward, and so far within the Craig Bond movies, I think they've done a pretty decent-ish job. Granted, I've only seen each movie once, with the exception of Spectre, so I don't know. Hopefully Bond, the franchise, can keep evolving with the times. I think there's something nice about this franchise still going. But, I mean, do you have anything else to add about James Bond?
I just thought that comment from that interview is spot on. I mean, a film can have sleazy characters, but it doesn't have to portray them in a sleazy manner. I just saw Honey Boy, and like there's a scene at a strip club that's like not visual at all, but you know it's a strip club because it's got dark lights, there's a bar, and there's neon everywhere. And like you see a pole, but like nobody on it. And you're like, okay, I get it. I know what's happening right now, and I don't need to have any women be compromised here. So it's yeah, I think that's a good way to go about it if you want to emphasize a character trait, but you don't want to actually exploit anybody. So, yeah, that's good. I will say I have an interest in watching the Craig Bond films, but sort of like a mini series. If it's longer than 90 minutes, I'm not super into it unless I'm really interested in the film. And knowing that there's 3 movies, one of which is not rated well, I'm like, maybe tomorrow. And by tomorrow, I mean like next year. And or next decade. Get it? Because it's going to be 2020 in like a week or two. So, dad jokes.
My silence spoke volumes there. No Time to Die is opening on April 2nd, 2020 in the United Kingdom, and on April 8th, 2020 in the United States. It is directed by Kari Fukunaga, who is best known for Piece of No Nation, as well as the Netflix show Maniac, as well as one of the recent seasons of True Detective. He's notably the first American to direct an official Bond film. Screenplay is credited to longtime Bond writers Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, with additional rewrites and polish coming from Casino Royale writer Paul Haggis, Steven Soderbergh and Matt Damon collaborator Scott Z. Burns, and the previously mentioned Phoebe Mary Waller-Bridge, the creator of Killing Eve, who, as I said before, is only the second ever woman to have a writing credit on a Bond film. You mentioned that this is one of the only franchises that Sony still has, and we're going to talk about the other Sony franchise that they have that is not Spider-Man, Ghostbusters Afterlife. After being evicted from their home, 2 children and their single mother moved to Somerville, Oklahoma, after inheriting property from their late grandfather. When the town experiences a series of unexplained earthquakes, the children discover their family's link to the original Ghostbusters, who become something of a myth, as many have long since forgotten the events of the Manhattan Cross-Rip of 1984, and the secret legacy that their grandfather left behind. So to address the elephant in the room right away, yes, there was a 2016 Ghostbusters reboot with an all-female cast, and that bombed. There was a lot of controversy surrounding the movie, most of which would probably take up their own podcast to talk about. So we're going to try and address that as little as possible. For the record, I watched the movie at a drive-in, and I didn't think it was particularly good or particularly bad. I had a very middling response to it, which is kind of disappointing given all the controversy. But while that movie tried to completely sort of pivot in a completely new direction, Afterlife goes in the more conventional sequel reboot direction. Our leads are the grandkids of the original cast. People speak of the events of the original 1984 film in like a hushed reverence. And there's some fun scenes where people wipe off like the dust away from old Ghostbusters tech, which I'm always a fan of. Paul Rudd plays the high school teacher who's a big fan of the original Ghostbusters, and Finn Wolfhard is here because he has to be in every single nostalgia revival. It's also been confirmed that pretty much the entire old cast is returning, which to me is one of the most notable things about it. There was always sort of an attempt to make a third Ghostbusters film, and the only thing really holding them back was the fact that Bill Murray, for whatever reason, just wasn't interested. I don't know if it's because he just felt like he'd done everything he could in the franchise, or he just had nothing else to say about the character. You'd be sort of this thing where like Dan Aykroyd would go on a talk show and be like, oh yeah, we're working on Ghostbusters 3, and Bill Murray would always be like, nope, not doing Ghostbusters 3. There actually was a 2009 video game that featured all of the original cast, sans Sigourney Weaver and Rick Moranis, who both turned down the roles, that actually incorporated elements from the Ghostbusters 3 script. And for all intents and purposes, Dan Aykroyd has stated that that video game is Ghostbusters 3 as we know it. Part of why I think there is so much of sort of a backlash against the reboot is that there is definitely the sense that once Harold Ramis had passed away, Sony just hit the green light on just doing anything to get Ghostbusters back off the ground. But now the cast is back. Ivan Reitman is back producing. And so we have a quote-unquote official sequel to Ghostbusters. I'm optimistic about it. I think the trailer looks decent. I also think that the original Ghostbusters is kind of this lightning in a bottle moment where all of these specific creative people have come together to make a very unique, specific thing that could only exist in the 80s. I don't know, Melvin. I just said a lot of things, but are you a Ghostbusters fan? What do you think of this trailer? And gosh darn it, is Paul Rudd just the most charming man alive?
My favorite Paul Rudd thing is that Tim and Eric skit where Paul Rudd goes to his computer. Have you ever seen that?
That is one of my favorite Tim and Eric skits as well. That is amazing. I love that skit.
It's just like, it's so funny. He's like, what is it? He's like, computer, show me Celery Man.
And it's just him
It's
dancing
so
in all
weird.
these different like outfits. Yeah, it's awesome.
Paul, your wife is calling. It's urgent. I'll take it later. I got work to do. It's just so bad.
Yeah, that's 2 minutes of time on YouTube, folks. It's totally worth it. So
It's perfect. Yeah, I like Paul Rudd. I think like of the sort of like straight white men that are just in like, and by straight man, I mean, let me phrase it this way. Such a bad way to.
that's just a weird shot at Paul Rudd. I don't know where that came from.
Like the straight man, like in a film where they're like,
Oh, okay.
not like straight as in like his sexuality. Like,
Yeah.
of all the straight white men in Hollywood.
It's like this is pivoting in a direction I did not expect.
Of all the actors in Hollywood that basically play the straight man, the guy that's just like the typical normal guy who is trying to catch up with all of the crazy stuff going on, Paul Rudd to me is one of the more entertaining ones because he's really expressive and he doesn't mind looking like an idiot, which basically if an actor doesn't mind looking like an idiot, then they're a very good actor because that's about playing their character. So yeah, I like Paul Rudd and I think it'll be fun to watch at the very least in this film. I have a passing interest in Ghostbusters. I like the first film as much as anybody. I think the thing about the first film is, like you said, it is lightning in a bottle. Everything is just right. Even Bill Murray came to like the script as he kept shooting it because he was not interested at first. And then as he was shooting and he's like, wait a minute, this is good. Then he got interested and he started to actually do his job. But the irony, of course, is that he did it passively for a paycheck. And in the film, he looks like he's passively doing everything for a paycheck and it really works.
Yeah.
So that's to his credit. But that was kind of his career anyway. He always was just sort of passively doing things for a paycheck.
Yeah, it's kind of become kind of legend that Dan Aykroyd very much takes ghosts seriously. There's interviews where he's asked if he believes in ghosts and he's dead serious he believes in ghosts. So I think part of that dynamic of like Dan Aykroyd wrote like a passion project and his friend is in the movie who thinks his passion project is stupid.
Yes.
It's one of those like perfect stars aligning moments that like no matter how many old actors you get to come back for the movie, you can't recreate that kind of dynamic.
I'm excited to see this new one, but not like excited in the sense that like, man, I love Ghostbusters. It is my favorite franchise. I can't wait to just treat it like my new Star Wars now that Star Wars is dead. Like it's just like I'm interested into seeing how they recover it in the sense that like 2016 was a disaster like on all fronts, which is a shame because there's some really funny women in it, but it's just not. I mean, what is it? There wasn't even really a script for the film. I mean, there was, but then they just ad-libbed constantly. So there's really no characters. It's just,
Yeah.
which ultimately doesn't work because the thing about the Ghostbusters movie is that the script is really tight and then the performers tweaked it to get the lines just right. I don't know. Anyways, it'll look cool. I think the trailer is a bit cringy though. Like, does anybody ever think about the Ecto One? Like they think about, I don't know, other nostalgia stuff? Like that was weird.
That gets that money shot of like it's the Ecto One like coming back. Like this is the Millennium Falcon being like dusted off to fly again, you know?
It's really just calling back to things we already know, which I know is the common criticism of nostalgia stuff. But the biggest issue really comes down to, are we innovating and are we continuing? Now, this trailer potentially will do that because if they're just basically going to make like kids become the Ghostbusters, that's kind of cool. Like then you're really doing something totally different. And that gets me interested. Let me let me say it this way because we're going to be talking about Wonder Woman. Like no spoilers there. Obviously we're going to talk about the 84 trailer. But I'm just really sick of like 80s nostalgia, which literally has been going on since the 90s. There have been 80s nostalgia since the 90s, everybody. I want to make that clear. 1990, there was already nostalgia for the 80s.
I think one of the questions we have to ask is, so you and I are both in our 20s. I feel like Ghostbusters is almost in this like weird sweet zone of like we're a little too young to be in that generation that has, because Ghostbusters was a fairly ever-present pop culture thing. They had video games, they had cartoons. I think there's a cartoon called The Ghostbusters, which was not affiliated in the real Ghostbusters cartoon.
With the gorilla.
Yes, there's the Ghostbusters with the gorilla, and then there's the real Ghostbusters, which featured the characters from Ghostbusters. So there was all this like merchandise and particularly toys. So I think for somebody who grew up with the Ecto-1 toy, seeing the Ecto-1 brought back to life here might be, you know, good nostalgia pop for them. But I think there is something to be said for we might just not be the target audience. Because for me, like, I was one of the people that as soon as I heard there was going to be a Ghostbusters reboot with an all-female cast, that was the thing I was excited for. I was thinking, oh, thank God they're not just going to do Ghostbusters again. They're trying something new. Like, my nightmare was like, all right, it's going to be Seth Rogen, Will Ferrell, John C. Reilly, and Adam Sandler, as your Ghostbusters. And it's going to be the same movie with the same jokes, but different people.
That's Pixels. You just described Pixels.
Yeah, it was just Pixel. Yeah. So I was worried they'd make Pixels. And they did anyway, eventually. But like the idea of like, okay, we're just going to do initially like Emma Stone was supposed to be in the movie along with like Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy and Leslie Jones. And I was like really excited for that. And then, you know, the movie kind of turned out very, I don't know. I think we might just not be in that zone of people that are there for like Ghostbusters was something grew up with loving. And now that it's going to be back and, you know, the band is back together kind of thing. It might just not be for us. So,
yeah. I
mean, I like science fiction. I like ghosts. I like a lot of the things that are in Ghostbusters, and I'm a big Paul Rudd fan. So, you know, I'm there for that. So hopefully, if it's good, it's good.
If Paul Rudd sits at a computer, I'll clap.
If there's a scene where he just keeps opening folders of him dancing, yes. But like it's like pictures of him from like like the 90s, because that's like what, you know, that makes sense within the context of the movie. I'm like, all right, 3 out of 5 stars at least, minimum. This is something to think about. So Ivan Reitman was quoted as saying, and I think he was being taken out of context a little bit, but there is, when it was initially announced that they were just rebooting the Ghostbusters by unrebooting it, he made a comment about like, all right, we're going to give the franchise back to the fans or something, where this movie is supposedly kind of supposed to be like an apology for the 2016 one. And so it's just, does the backlash and all of the hullabaloo around the 2016 film, which, I mean, let's call a spade. There was, for some people, elements of possibly sexism. I mean, I think the 2016 film was also just a victim of the first trailer was horrendous. That was just a bad trailer. B, it was also coming around a time that there was a ton, and we kind of forget it now because most of these movies have faded from our memory, but it was in that wave of everything was getting rebooted or soft rebooted. You had like the Vacation reboot where it was Chevy Chase's kid played by Ed Helms. You know, there was all these like franchises coming back all of a sudden. So I do think there was maybe something about, oh, they're doing it to Ghostbusters too. We love Ghostbusters. That might have rubbed people the wrong way. I don't know if we can necessarily comment on the state of people's hearts and what their motivation is. I personally saw a lot of comments that were just horrific. Leslie Jones just got bullied off of Twitter. Like people were tweeting pictures of monkeys at her and stuff like that. Just very ugly. So like, does all of that make people more excited for a Ghostbusters movie where they're going to course correct and like, we're going to apologize for that fiasco in 2016? Does it burn people out more in the franchise where now people are like, oh man, another Ghostbusters? We just had one. Kind of like what happened with the recent Terminator film. Does all of this baggage around it help or hinder the movie?
I think it doesn't really hinder it just because we're living in such a fast world now. Now, this is coming from the perspective of I've only ever really had like a healthy conscience perspective on the world in the last 5 years. Because I think like 5 years ago, I was like 18. So like it was not, my perspective on life was not to the point that it is now. And then obviously now is not to the point that like my dad is. So maybe my dad could tell me, oh, the world's always been fast. And maybe my grandpa the same. But the world is so fast now. So you just get these new movies that are like reboots or whatever that come out. So whatever. That said, I do think there is something about like the response to the 2016 film being really, really vitriolic. And like there was a third thing, like you briefly mentioned bullied off Twitter, but the third thing also being like, I think like, I hate mentioning even its name, but like Gamergate was happening like the year prior. And so like you already had just like nerd culture was vehemently outwardly sexist. There were probably some people that were like, No, we actually really just dislike this thing, and it had nothing to do with sexism. But for like the 10% that was probably appropriately being like, we just are not interested in this film. The trailer's bad, and we don't want to see it. There was like 90% of the internet was just like you said, like really, really horrible, horrible treatment toward Ghostbusters and toward the actors. Like no reason for it other than the fact that they're like, we just don't like women. Like it really just came down to that. And I'll die on that hill. So if someone listening is just like nodding their head, like, no, Melvin, you don't understand. Like, no, I get it. I was there. Like, I was on the internet at the time.
Yeah.
And I was much more nasty then. Like, the Lord has pulled me out from like a lot. So like, I was in those circles, not vehemently against women, but I was watching YouTubers that were this way all the time. I don't know how I feel about like a company taking a property like that and just sort of adapting it into like we're going to try it again but we're going to give you what you want. Something about that kind of grosses me out because like
Yeah.
and I'm going to say this first. It's a not looking at the quality of the 2016 film because I didn't see it, but I've heard that it's like not very good from people that didn't even care about the controversy. I had a friend who's like didn't have any idea what was going on the internet, didn't have any idea what happened to Leslie Jones, saw it and just said, "Yeah, it was really boring." And so like she's like, "Yeah, I took like some of my I was babysitting these teenagers and we went and none of them liked it." And I'm like, "That's okay."
It's tough to really quantify. I know I said we wouldn't talk about this, but it's tough to really quantify people's motivations for things. I tend to run in very mixed like I pride myself on being able to sort of I'm kind of everywhere. Like I'm in a lot of left book groups, I'm in a lot of tanky groups, I'm in a lot of very Christian groups, more just for my own like curiosity than anything else. And so I saw a good amount of people's reactions was purely like, oh, that looks bad. Like when I saw the trailer, I was just like, that looks like a bad movie. Because if you're someone like Leslie Jones, 99% of the internet could be like, this movie looks great. But if 1% of the internet is just sending you like racist things, that's going to really stick out, man. Like if one person tweets something mean at me, that ruins my day probably. I don't know. Like if someone just unprompted was like, I hate you, Dan, I'd be like, well,
just imagine
that's not nice.
Like you're just in a comment
like,
thread, some random dude just like says,
yeah.
"Dan, you're the worst," and you're like, "Aw," and you just sad react it.
Why? Why, dude? Now imagine that taken 1,000 times up a notch. That's what these women were experiencing. Where if only 50 people were doing that, but just kept doing it, that would stick out a lot. So like that's sort of the unfortunate thing where whoever you hitch your wagon with, that's who you're gonna be associated with. This is just honestly just a general life thing.
It's funny that we both sort of like are saying the same thing, but we're coming from like different percentages. Like I'm the one who's saying like 10% liked it and 90% were racist. And then you're like
well,
1% were racist and 99% were kind of okay. And honestly, who can really say?
Yeah.
I just know that like,
but it doesn't matter kind of.
Yeah, it really doesn't. Especially when like Leslie Jones apparently had the best like performance in the film, like was the one that was the funniest. So like it was like super dumb.
The movie was lacking in characters. Like a lot of so the problem with movies that are heavy in improv is you lose characterization because from one scene someone is being like really serious and like introspective or something, and then the next scene they're just screaming. That's kind of what the movie was like, where there's scenes where Kristen Wiig, who is we're getting into this. I think Kristen Wiig is a really underrated actress. I think she's really good. But there are scenes where she's playing this kind of like character who is very serious about science. She wants to like legitimately study ghosts and things like that. But the next scene, she's like SNL Kristen Wiig because everyone's just improving. And that's fine in like Anchorman, where like nobody's a real character, or Step Brothers, where the characters are just ludicrous idiots, so it doesn't matter. It's another thing in a movie that is kind of aiming to have like some semblance of a serious story. Leslie Jones is one of the only people that had like a consistent characterization throughout the film. I felt like she has like a good backstory. She adds things to the film that I think were kind of lacking from the characters, where she has like her character is just someone who like is like I'm trying to remember. I think she's like a taxi driver or something. So she like knows the terrain. So she actually adds something interesting to the team. But then like, yeah, everyone else is just kind of running around screaming the whole movie. So it just kind of was like that for me, that takes me out of it. I mean, everyone else, I'm sure there's a lot of people who can just turn the brain off for those scenes and just laugh and then turn it back on for when they're supposed to like care. But for me, that kind of ruins like the narrative momentum of the movie, where one scene people are just kind of like screaming, next scene they're just having a serious heart-to-heart moment where like Kristen Wiig is sharing a story about like seeing a ghost as a child, knowing believing her. Like that whiplash just didn't do it for me.
You are forgetting one other character.
Chris Hemsworth.
I was going to say Bill Murray. His character is
Oh,
sitting down and looking
yeah.
tired.
Oh man, yeah, he did not look happy to be there. Honestly, like there's a scene. So I will say two things very positive about Ghostbusters 2016. There's a sequence where they're just testing gear in like alleyways. That's good. Like I like that a lot because that was something you didn't really see in the other Ghostbusters movies, where it's just sort of like, hey, I made tech. I was like, oh, okay,
Yeah, that's right. And
like,
they just put it
we
on.
live in a world where we can catch ghosts now. This movie, there was sequences where they were designing tech, testing them, and those things were funny. There's a sequence at the very end of this movie where Kristen Wiig is just walking through their Ghostbusters headquarters, and all the characters are kind of like doing their character thing. Like you see Kate McKinnon's character is like messing around with gadgets, and Sigourney Weaver shows up as like her gadget mentor, and it's awesome. And there's a scene where Leslie Jones is like, I think it's her dad, but played by Ernie Henson from Ghostbusters, shows up and is like talking about like how like you stole my hearse and like all this stuff. And there's this scene where they're just doing a tour of their hideout, and it's awesome. Like it's funny, it's interesting, and it kind of was like this should have been the movie. Like you should have just made a movie where there's being Ghostbusters, as opposed to just trying to make this big origin story movie. Like I thought it was great, and then there's a big teaser thing where they mention like Zool, and then that movie's never getting made. So, which is kind of sad. Like I was like, you know what? If this is the sequel, I'm on board. And then now it's just gone forever. So
Well, now we have Zool probably terrorizing kids. So
yeah, probably. I mean, you see Slimer in the trailer. That went way too long. So Ghostbusters Afterlife is scheduled for release July 10th, 2020. It's written and directed by Jason Reitman, the son of original director Ivan Reitman, who's producing. However, Jason Reitman, for those who don't know, is the writer-director behind Up in the Air and Thank You for Smoking, and as well as collaborations with Diablo Cody on Juno, Young Adult, and Tully. And I mention all that because this isn't just Ivan sticking his kid in a movie. This guy has some real directing and writing chops. The film was also curtained by Monster House director Gil Kennan, who also directed the Poltergeist remake. Speaking of ghosts and things we thought were dead and being resurrected, our next film is Black Widow. Now, usually I read a blurb on the film. I usually go out from IMDb, Wikipedia, or I look for press releases. However, Disney is notoriously tight-lipped when it comes to any sort of plot details. The official Marvel Studios website literally just states Scarlett Johansson reprises the role as Natasha Black Widow in Marvel Studios' action-packed spy thriller Black Widow. So there you go. What we do know about the movie is that it takes place between Civil War and Infinity War. Regardless, there's plenty for MCU fans to munch on in the trailer. We see shots of Budapest and Thunderbolt Ross. We see the images of the famous Red Room where Black Widows are trained. There's a fun sequence in the trailer where Black Widow goes toe-to-toe with Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova, and they basically mirror each other's movements. We get glimpses of David Harbour as the Red Guardian in what appears to be either a scene-stealing role or this movie's Fat Thor that people complain about on the internet. We also see fan-favorite character Taskmaster, who we've yet to have any sort of actor announced attached to him. Melvin, are you familiar with Taskmaster at all?
No, I'm not. Is he cool?
Taskmaster is pretty cool. It's a trope in comic books where you just have cool assassin guy with weapons, but Taskmaster is a great gimmick, which is that he can just watch what you do and completely mirror everything you do. So the reason he has a bow and arrow is because in the comics, he is just as good an archer as Hawkeye. The reason he has a shield in the comics is because he can do all the stuff Captain America can do. So he basically can mimic and repeat all of your powers and abilities. So that's really cool, and I'm really excited for that character. The trailer also has a big set piece where Black Widow jumps off of something and flies past falling debris as bad guys parachute down and shoot at her. Personally, I was kind of hoping for a smaller, more Jason Bourne, James Bond-esque spy thriller, but alas, this is the MCU after all. I think it's a decent trailer. I like the music in it. Like I said, I was kind of hoping for something more in line with Haywire or John Wick, but I guess those aren't movies that make $1 billion. So here we are. I think the cast look great. We have Rachel Weisz as an older Black Widow. Ray Winstone, who's one of my favorite kind of gruff character actors, has been in an undisclosed role. Not to mention, I feel like Scarlett Johansson just doesn't get enough credit as an actress. She's often cast in these big effects movies like Lucy or Ghost in the Shell, but we've seen her in stuff like Lost in Translation where she's really good. So I'm optimistic mostly. I mean, the MCU has yet to really give me a big stinker so far. I mean, there's definitely been movies that weren't great, like Iron Man 2 or The Incredible Hulk or Captain Marvel. But tell me, Melvin, are you officially starting to finally feel that comic book fatigue we keep hearing about? Are you excited for Black Widow's for a solo outing? Or do you just think this looks like just another MCU movie?
It looks like another MCU movie. And I'll still see it because I think Flo Pugh's great. I mean, I I don't really care about Marvel, like, especially now. I wasn't really impressed with Endgame, and even if I was impressed with Endgame, I still would probably feel the same way I do now, where like, okay, the story's over. And so this being the first in phase 4, it really has to sell something really good to get me interested. So I'll see it, obviously. I mean, I'll see it no matter what, because that's just how MCU movies work.
Man.
I have to review it. And I have AMC A-list, so it's no skin off my back.
Doesn't that say a lot about how things are, where you're just like, there's nothing about this movie I like, I have no interest. Look forward to my review, everyone. Like, it's coming. I have to watch it. So
Yeah. So like, look, if I like it, that's really cool. But I wanted to mention something specifically. And I didn't have time to look up the term, but what's that term where like something triggers a trauma experience and you're like, I just don't want to look at it or something like that? I feel like you might know that term.
are you just talking about being triggered? Like in the actual sense, not the
I mean, it's
internet
not like
sense?
triggered. It's like so there's triggered, but there's an actual term for like you have a smell or a sound or you see somebody or whatever and you get a trauma experience, like a revival. There's like a
Like a
specific term.
flashback?
Yeah, I guess. Whenever I see David Arbor's face, I remember my miserable experience seeing Hellboy this year.
Oh, okay. I was like,
And I'm
where is
like,
this going?
and
Like,
yeah, the MCU triggers me.
David Harbour once came to my house and beat me up, and I am just
Yeah. You might as well have. Like I saw Hellboy, I came home and I was like, man, I need a drink. Like this was horrible. And I didn't even have Dan Aykroyd's wonderful skull vodka, which he sells, saying that ghosts are real. So like I can't watch Stranger Things anymore. I don't find it entertaining after season 2 anyway. I haven't even watched season 3.
Season 3 is a huge step up from season 2. I'm just gonna say that right now.
Okay, maybe I'll watch season 3, but I
Yeah.
heard it's more sitcom-y than anything.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, that's not what I want at all. I didn't even want season 2. I thought season 1 was fine. So like just seeing David Arbor in the trailer, I'm like, can I even sit through this without being like, I saw him in a movie that physically assaulted me? Anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, just listen to my Hellboy review and I'll tell you all about my traumatic experience with that movie. And I'm not even kidding. Like, this is not hyperbolizing. It was literally a traumatic experience. The first time I've ever had that happen with a movie, where now when I walk into a theater, I think to myself, am I literally going to be assaulted right now? So basically what's happening with Black Widow for me is there is so much baggage from different areas of the world
Jeez.
and my entire life that when I'm going into it, I'm like, I'm either going to be bored, I'm going to waste my time, not my money because I have A-list, so that's just my weekend, or I'm just going to have like constant triggers and flashbacks watching this movie, thinking about a horrible experience I had. To which I say, gosh darn it, I'm going to fill my flask and I'm going to get through it. So it's just a weird, this was a really weird trailer for me to watch because like I said, like Flo Pugh's great. Oh, and Scarlett Johansson has convinced me she's actually a good actor because I watched Jojo Rabbit this year and I also just, I watched Marriage Story and I thought, wow, she is a really great actor.
She's really good.
And
Yeah.
they don't use her at all in the MCU. Like she has nothing to do in the MCU. And so like the trailer, what's the one line where she's like, it's like the beginning of the trailer where she's talking about like, I'm ready to, there's no place safe anywhere. Like I just said it with more character and inflection than she does. And that's literally because they're directing her to do that, not because she's incapable of being an actor. So I don't know. It's like, I'm really cynical about this next movie and seeing, like you said, the set piece at the end where she's like flying through and people are shooting at her, which is stupid. Like, this is this is weird, man. I don't know what to think about Black Widow, but I'm gonna see it anyway because that's how this works. That's how this world works now. So whatever.
Well, I didn't mean to rile up such strong feelings in you, Melvin.
Forget this. Let's just talk about Wonder Woman. Just move on.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, there's so little to go off on for me. I think it's an interesting first foot to be on as far as like setting up the rest of your franchise. Like a lot of people have been asking for a Black Widow film for a long time. Initially, when Ike Perlmutter was in charge of Marvel, he has infamously been like quoted as saying that neither women nor actors who are not white can lead big blockbuster films. And then Black Panther was hugely successful. Captain Marvel was successful. So, I mean, it does feel a little too late, where like they just waited so long to pull a trigger. Now they're stuck kind of making a strange prequel movie because they killed the character off. That's odd. I feel like it is not the best timing. I mean, better late than never, I suppose. There was not a lot in this trailer that got me sort of like really pumped and excited for this particular franchise. I'm not sure where they're going to go with it. A lot of people sort of theorize that this movie is going to be used to set up the next Black Widow. The Yelena we see in the trailer, that she's going to sort of take Black Widow's place as Black Widow. So that's interesting. Like I said, I'm a fan of the character Taskmaster, so that's my nerdiness coming out and sort of compelling me to see this. But yeah, I was hoping for something different. I wanted to see, like, part of what makes the whole closure of Marvel Television Studios so sad is that you legitimately did get sort of like different genres of things in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like The Runaways and Cloak and Dagger feel like just teen dramas with odd sci-fi or fantasy elements in them. Like the Netflix shows felt like more like kind of a gritty street level kind of show. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is such a strange, bizarre beast of a thing to watch. There's this homogenizing of the MCU as it continues to do so is very distressing to me. I'm optimistic about like WandaVision, but like to see like, oh, we have a super spy character who's going to see places around the world. What should we do? The same action set pieces that you see in all the other Marvel movies. Like, that is not what I want. I wanted to see Black Widow like maneuvering around corners and breaking people's necks. I want to see gritty like streets. I want to see like her going through the red light district and like, you know, shooting gangsters. Like, that's what I want out of a Black Widow movie. I don't want to see just another MCU movie, for lack of a better term. Like, it's its own genre at this point. So,
well, good thing we have Winter Soldier, because Winter Soldier does that. I mean, Winter Soldier has an amazing fight scene in a stairwell. And that's the thing. Like, Winter Soldier actually did what we wanted. And this trailer shows us exactly what we don't. But I think that's about as much as like I just think MCU can't move further from the line that it's already at. And we really have to see if Phase 4 decides to change things up, because I know that's the plan. Like, Feige said that like he wants to expand further and Phase 4 is the opportunity to do so. But I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. If I had my way, which I will never have my way because that's just not going to happen, but like, so there's a She-Hulk show coming out, and She-Hulk in the comics is just a lawyer who just is She-Hulk. Like, that's part of what makes the character so fun. It's as I've described. So I would love it if they just made Law and Order, but it's just She-Hulk, and we're dealing with like law and like lawsuits within the MCU. Like someone suing New York because they didn't do a good enough job of protecting their building from aliens. You know what I mean? Like, hey, someone claiming that the Punisher killed the next door neighbor and not them, and She-Hulk's representing them, and then Matt Murdock is there because he's also a lawyer. That's what I want. I want just normal genre movies and television shows that just happen to be in a comic book world. Because to me, that's so much more interesting. Like, why can't you just have like a buddy rom-com movie? Why can't you just have like, I don't know, just there's all these different characters in Marvel that do these interesting, unique things. Like Damage Control is literally just a group of people whose job is to clean up after superheroes destroy things. That would make a great show. Or like anyone here can name like a bizarre, weird like Marvel character that would make a great series, like Squirrel Girl. Or like, why don't you have a show where MODOK is the villain?
Gwenpool.
You know?
A Gwenpool series would be wonderful. Why was that canceled? Why was that comic canceled? I don't understand.
Like, that would be awesome if like there was just an MCU movie where like you just see someone in the theater watching a Marvel movie and then they get sucked into the movie, and now they're Gwenpool using their MCU knowledge to try and maneuver around.
It'd be great.
That would be great.
It'd be great.
Like, I would immediately, like, that's all the things you want. Good female representation. It's a fresh character. You're doing something new. But who knows? Maybe, I don't know, maybe Shang-Chi is going to be great. Maybe the Doctor Strange movie is actually going to be a horror movie like they promised. Who knows? I don't know. I have such a strong love-hate relationship with the MCU. I love the MCU. It's kind of falling apart right now for various reasons. But, like, I'm one of, like, the 100 people who's really upset that all the shows are getting canceled and possibly get rebooted. That's just not cool. And I don't know. Yeah, and like everyone else, I am also kind of sick and upset at all the things that are residual effects of the MCU. So, yeah, Disney bad. Black Widow is scheduled to be released on May 1st, 2020. It is directed by Kate Shortland, who has directed several critically acclaimed independent and European films. It was written by Jacques Schaeffer, the creator of the upcoming WandaVision Disney Plus series, and Ned Benson, who wrote and directed The Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby. It's also worth noting that Darren Prescott is credited as a stunt coordinator, as he is the stunt coordinator of John Wick 1 and 2. So there's hope that maybe the action scenes are more in line with what I'm expecting, but who knows. Black Widow isn't the only solo female superhero movie in 2020. Marvel's eternal rival DC is releasing up their own offering in the form of Wonder Woman in 1984. Similar to Black Widow, there's not much concrete released about the Wonder Woman film. All that we know is Maxwell Lord and Cheetah are the villains, and Steve Trevor is inexplicably present despite the handicap of dying in World War I. The trailer, however, gives us a lot to work with. We have a cool remix of New Order's Blue Monday throughout it, and there's a lot of great 80s colors and tones. Kristen Wiig, who we know as Cheetah, appears to have some sort of friendship with Wonder Woman, while Pedro Pascal, the Mandalorian himself, is Maxwell Lord, who in this version appears to be some sort of like infomercial tycoon, which I'm totally here for. Pretty much everything to do with the look of the film really excites me. I love the colors, I love the music, I love the sounds. There's also some hints that the slow-mo action from the first movie is back, which I was not a huge fan of that particularly. I love Gal Gadot as this character. For me, she was the first version of what Marvel has with Chris Evans as Captain America or Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, where this is the character. Like the moment I see them on screen, I'm like, that is Wonder Woman. I've really liked her performance so far, and I'm very cautiously excited for where Patty Jenkins is taking this. I think it's a little silly that Chris Pine is back, as it sort of retroactively lessens the impact of the first Wonder Woman film, which I thought overall was solid, though it had some issues. So for this one, I'm cautiously excited. I know there were some leaks and rumors that said things like, oh, bad preview screenings, but at this point that happens for almost every movie, so I don't know what to do with that information anymore. But overall, I'm pretty excited. What do you think, Melvin? Are you... I wrote down in the notes, are you down for the 80s throwback vibe? And we've already established that you are very much not down for that. What do you think, Melvin? What were your thoughts on this trailer?
It's a good trailer. Kind of. I mean, it reminded me of the Birds of Prey trailer where like they have the aesthetic they're going for, but then like they show the scenes of dialogue that don't actually fit the aesthetic, where like it's super 80s and poppy and this and that, but then like Gal Gadot speaks and she sounds tired or not interested, but mostly her fish out of water, but now she's teaching people things. And so it's kind of like the reverse of the previous film where she was the fish out of water. And then Chris Pine's character was telling her like, actually, this is how the world works outside of your little island. The testament to me not being that interested is that like I heard the script leaked and I didn't read the script, but I read what it was about. And that was the first time I've ever really done that for a movie, because let's be real, I'm more interested with the direction. If we end up getting more films like Joker, I'm more interested in that direction than the current like big budget punch up movies. I did like Shazam a lot. I think Shazam's probably my most favorite of all of these, where like I agree. I had the same experience with Gal Gadot where I was like, okay, she's Wonder Woman. And then Zachary Levi too was like, hey, that's a really great Shazam. That's awesome. Or Captain Marvel if you're one of those people. So I'm interested, but again, like the 80s, like it starts out and it's got the poppy music and it's like 1984 and I'm like, okay, like this sounds boring. I don't know. The 80s stuff just doesn't get me. I just want something good with a good aesthetic. And like, let me start it this way. I mean, I tried reading Ready Player One, which is just retro aesthetic the entire time.
That book is bad. I'm going to go on record as saying that is a bad book. So.
I got to like page 67, I think, and I still remember it because like I looked at the page number and said, can I even continue this? And I shut the book and put it away. And I just haven't finished it. I'd like to finish it. It was my uncle's favorite book, so I was like, okay, cool. But it's like passively edgy, and it sort of reads like something like someone on 4chan would write on their lit board, where like they like playing video games and they like to be the cool kid in school, but it's like a digital virtual school, and like his avatar looks nothing like him in real life. I am always at risk of repeating myself when it comes to these things. And I think the reason I'm saying that out loud is because all of these movies all just look the same to me. They don't look any different. This movie looks like Black Widow. This movie looks like Captain Marvel. And honestly, like how irritating, like this is a different thought. How irritating is it that they're having Wonder Woman wear the same outfit as before when the promotional picture I felt like was them responding to the fact that people were like, yeah, good, female lead actor. but she's showing so much skin. Why are you making her wear a miniskirt and punch people and kick people? Like, that is so weird. And then like the trailer just shows her in her typical outfit, and like there's like a cutaway where she's sliding on the ground and the camera's right behind her, and I'm like, this is just weird. And then you're saying there's going to be slow motion stuff probably, and I'm like, okay, I really don't need slow motion while this actor's wearing like a mini skirt and a tank top punching people. That just feels really disgusting to me. So I don't know, not for me. Everything about this is not for me, except for the telemarketing aspect. I think that's really cool. So I might go see it just for that, because that sounds campy and fun. I don't know. I am just cynical. I'm excited for 2020. Yay.
I was overall a fan of the first Wonder Woman film. There are some things about the movie that I didn't like. The DCU is just a weird beast where I can't tell if this is supposed to be kind of almost like a soft reboot, where they can use the setting and time period to avoid any connections to the other films, and they can kind of like pivot into their own, whatever direction they want for the future. And I don't know, I like giving this franchise a fresh coat of paint, and I do think sort of a retro aesthetic is possibly what the Doctor ordered in order to do that. You can have all these fresh characters. You can not have any sort of the baggage from, Justice League or Batman vs Superman, or you don't have to worry about incorporating those things into it. Really, like, what I would like is if they use a setting to do something interesting. Like we talked about Stranger Things. And one of the things I liked about the first season of Stranger Things is that the setting was like there to do and only utilize sort of meaningful ways. Like, okay, the kids don't have cell phones, the pop culture things, and like they're playing D&D because of the time period, and they utilize that and their knowledge of that to like fight monsters. And then they have like all the Cold War paranoia plays into the plot, where there's this like secret government stuff. Like, I thought all that utilized very well. It wasn't just people like solving Rubik's cubes in front of the screen, or like just like shoving pop culture things in your face. And that's kind of what, with this movie, I'm worried that it'll either A, not be brought up at all, where the setting is just the setting and it's sort of used in perfunctory kind of way, or like maybe they'll use like the Cold War like elements to do something interesting, where like there's some sort of like secret science thing that they have to deal with, or they have to stop the Russians, because you always have to stop the Russians. Or who knows, maybe they'll even go bolder. Like, what if they like touched upon the AIDS epidemic at the time and use that for some sort of social commentary, or use that to sort of make some sort of like interesting like statement about the times. If you really want to differentiate yourself from Marvel, I think one way to do it is like to more bluntly deal with like tougher subject material or something, or to comment on Reagan era politics or something. I don't know. I like superheroes, so I'm kind of on board already. But I don't know. With the DCEU, I've taken a sort of you'll wait and see kind of approach. Like, I mentioned that I'm kind of interested in Birds of Prey, but we'll see. We'll see what the response is. We'll see if it's something worth investing in.
Like I said, the telemarketing thing was the only cool thing, and of the things that I read online about this film, like about what the film's about, that was like the thing that least, like, that was the weirdest thing in the description. And then like in the trailer, it was the only thing that looked really cool.
Yeah. My thing with script leaks is that a friend of mine put it this way. It's like looking at lyrics without hearing the music with it.
Mm-hmm.
Without seeing the script in action, without seeing the actors delivering the lines, putting their spin on it, without seeing what directions the people on set the day of do with the material, I don't know if it's necessarily always fair to judge a movie by that. I mean, if there is like fundamental things wrong with the story and the characters, like no amount of post-production or actors putting their spin on it will fix that. Like, that's a good example of that. Like, okay, this guy feels dumb. A guy who's like trying to conquer the world through infomercials or whatever he's doing, that sounds stupid. But then in action, because like Pedro Pascal's really selling it, and the way they're incorporating the story is really interesting. Like, I think it's a great example of that. So Maxwell Lord is an interesting like villain. I don't know if you've ever watched Supergirl, but he's like the villain of the first season of Supergirl. In the comics, Wonder Woman just straight up kills him at one point. So
That's awesome.
I don't know if he'll do that in the movie. But yeah, he's a fun villain. So I'm glad. That's the one thing I like about the more superhero movies they make, the more they have to reach into the deep in their bag of villains. I am patiently waiting for Doctor Doom to finally show up in Marvel, along with Kang the Conqueror, or so. Same with DC. DC, like, the part of what I'm interested in Matt Reeves' Batman movie is it seems like he's just trying to throw as much of the rogues gallery out there as he can, and I love Batman's rogues gallery. So hopefully, like, by the Batman 3, he's fighting Killer Moth or something. So I'm down for that. So Wonder Woman 1984 is set to be released on June 5th, 2020. It is directed by the returning Patty Jenkins and is co-written by her along with esteemed comic book writer Jeff Johns. Seriously, I could spend the rest of the podcast just listing things that he is credited as writing on, both in comics and television. And David Callahan, who co-wrote Doom and the Expendables, and just recently, very suddenly, became an in-demand writer, where he co-wrote Zombieland 2 and is attached to writing Shang-Chi and Into the Spider-Verse 2, all from the guy who co-wrote The Expendables. That's weird. Anyway, continuing our trend of heroic women, we turn to Disney's latest live-action offering, Mulan. When the Emperor of China issues a decree that one man per family must serve in the Imperial Chinese Army to defend the country from the Huns, Mulan, the eldest daughter of an honored warrior, steps in to take the place of her ailing father. She is spirited, determined, and quick on her feet. Disguised as a man by the name of Hu Wan, she is tested every step of the way and must harness her innermost strength and embrace her true potential. Up front, apologies for all the horrible pronunciations of Chinese names that I'm going to be making for the duration of this segment. When it comes to recent live action remakes, I often have trouble figuring out what to say, because especially with things like Aladdin and Lion King, all you can really say is it's that movie again, but slightly more live action and with more muted colors. Here, there appears to be some creative decisions that offer a little something more. There's now a female witch played by Gong Li, a large cast of recognizable Asian actors, including Donnie Yen, Jet Li, and Liu Yi in the title role, and a seemingly more serious take on the subject matter at hand. What most people are going to notice is there's apparently going to be a lack of any songs. This is not a musical, so if you're expecting to see a big epic live action rendition of I'll Make a Man Out of You, sorry, out of luck. And it appears that they're going to be utilizing instrumental versions of the songs playing in the background to try and placate people. And it also appears as though they're going to be trying to downplay the more cartoony elements from the cartoon. Mushu is in the movie, though he's not in the trailer. He's going to be voiced by David Diggs. But I think his absence from the trailer really speaks to what kind of tone they're trying to sell for this. I don't know. My interest is somewhat piqued at the idea of having a more epic and grand version with the Mulan story that honors source material more. But like I said, when it comes to live action Disney, I'm sort of very cold on it. Also, if Donnie Yen doesn't like Wing Chun someone to death at some point in the movie, I'm going to be really disappointed. So Melvin, what do you think about this reimagining of the Mulan story? Is it going to be better or worse than Lady and the Tramp? Also, do you think this movie is striking the right tone as far as sort of eschewing all of the more cartoony fun elements from the animated version in exchange for a more epic, grand scale?
It will definitely be better than Lady and the Tramp.
Well, that's good.
I can't see it being worse.
Throw that on the Blu-ray box. Yeah.
Oh, man. Do I think it's striking the right tone? Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, the biggest issue with these films, especially in the last year with the live action remakes, is that they've been imitations more than they have been reimaginings. If they ever reimagine something, it's like one new song that no one's going to remember, like in Aladdin. Like, the only songs people will remember are, first off, the animated original songs and not the new versions.
Yeah.
And then any of the new songs won't be remembered. So that's just kind of how it is. And so by taking that out, that's a really good choice. By not having new versions of these songs is great. By letting it be the soundtrack, I actually thought was very effective in the trailer. I thought that was like really cool, how you're basically getting the same motifs from these thematic songs and using them in ways to help drive the film. There's a bit of cynicism about that, though, and I'll describe it this way. I just saw Waves in theaters. I saw it twice. I really, really liked it. But one of the big things about this movie is that it uses a licensed soundtrack a lot. And a lot of it really helps to impact and drive the scenes. Part of that works because it's a very Gen X, Gen Z kind of movie. And if you ever talk to someone younger, you know that they're always blasting Spotify, and how they engage the world is through music. And so that works. But it's also really manipulative. And if you don't know the songs, it might not be as effective. But if you do know the songs, you're basically going, oh man, I really like this song, and now I'm really engaged in the scene. So Mulan kind of could suffer that, because these are going to be songs that everybody has known for years.
Right,
and so whether or not they like what's going on in the scene, they like the song. And so now they're going to be more engaged. But also, that's kind of how film works anyway. Like,
true.
Film is constantly about, you're using all these different mediums and trying to better translate certain stuff. So I'm not really that cynical about how music is used. other than like temp music or like if something just sounds like trailer music with the big whomps or like Inception stuff.
I know you said that you're not a big fan of animation in general, and like you don't.
I'm not a fan of anime. I like animation. I'm
Yeah.
just not a fan of anime.
Well, you said that you're not really a big Pixar person.
Well, that's just in general. That I should say that I like animation, but I don't really watch Pixar movies, and I don't really watch anime anymore. So maybe you're right. Maybe I don't like animation.
I'm just thinking because like when I saw Toy Story 4, like the moment You Got a Friend in Me started playing, like I started getting emotional, and that's like I can't decide if that's manipulative or if they're just using the tools they have. Like
Right.
you can't fault them for using what's there. Like I thought the Beauty and the Beast remake was pretty average and not particularly interesting, but like as soon as he starts singing Be Our Guest, like there's just something about it. And I get like I don't know if this whole episode that we're doing is sort of like a dissection of nostalgia, maybe because just the nature of the way film is, but like when you hear those songs, like when I heard You Got a Friend in Me, like immediately I remember like just putting the original VHS tape in the VCR, as a kid. Or like I remember like my grandmother loved Disney. Actually, no, my grandfather loved Disney, but my grandmother would always take me to see those movies. And so like Be Our Guest, like I'm suddenly like I remember my grandparents who have since passed away. And I don't know if it's fair. Like there's a weird Reddit. This is sort of a weird rabbit trail that I was kind of hoping to mention because I don't think I'll ever get another like chance to talk about this. There's an interesting Reddit story where someone was talking about how they used to work in a kitchen with a guy who would just always sing "I'll Make a Man Out of You" from Mulan. And like no one knew anything about this guy. They didn't know where his family is from. They understood that they're like, yeah, we knew he was Asian and he wasn't from here because he didn't really speak good English. We didn't know anything about him. But for whatever reason, he would just sing that song all the time. And then like eventually he passed away. And so all of these people went to his funeral. And like there's all this extended family they never seen. There's these people they never met before. And so like after the funeral, like they're just like all like sitting around and someone went to the store and just bought like the soundtrack or something and they brought it and started playing it. And everyone starts singing the song together. And like his family is just, what is happening? Why? And they explain like he would just sing the song all the time. And they're like, oh, that's just so him or whatever. And so like this guy's like, every time I hear that song, like I just think of this like occasion where we're all crying and laughing and remembering this guy's life, that he brought so much joy to our lives and we really didn't know anything about this guy, but there's this one thing about him I remember. And like reading that story has forever associated that song with this person I've never met's funeral. And so it's this weird thing where like now, like, I don't know, like there's this weird emotional attachment to Mulan that makes zero sense to me. Like I just like there's something about this song now because I just think about this like with this way that music connects people and the way you remember people and all that stuff. I also think Mulan is this underrated nostalgia figure for our generation. Like I don't know if like people maybe in their 30s are young or people who are younger than us don't realize it, but Mulan was like the Disney princess when I was a kid. Like it's just I can't quite remember the original release date, but like Mulan is like she's just it. She was a strong female character. She had a cool movie. We hadn't really seen sort of like the Chinese setting before in like a Disney film, and so just like Mulan's this awesome warrior who uses swords and like talks with a dragon. Like she's cool. So like I think this possibly could be a breakout hit. And there's also like the whole thing of the Chinese market is now really important to Disney and really important to the global box office. So I think they're smart in that regard. Do we dare address the controversy, Melvin?
Yeah, I meant to ask you before we started. I don't even like there's all these controversies I don't know about. What's happening in the world? Like, okay, there's an impeachment happening. Cool, whatever. But what else is going on? Like
I'm just going to mention it because I think you might be remiss to mention it. I will provide zero commentary because this is just completely out of my depth.
Oh,
I
think I know it. I think I know it.
Yes. Some of you have perhaps seen the protests in Hong Kong, pro-democracy protests. The lead actors for this film and many other cast members have tweeted their support for the Chinese government, which some people see as bad. Other people pointed out that, hey, just the way things are in China, it might just be, they might be in a position where they can't protest. Disney, and if there was ever a great example of how cold, calculating, and somewhat evil Disney is, it's been reported that Disney looked at like this is the number of people who are protesting, but most in mainland China is not pro-democracy, so we're probably fine. And Disney has not commented on the controversy whatsoever. So there you go. A weird mixture of capitalism and not capitalism mixing. So like that's sort of like, so there was this hashtag like boycott the Mulan movie because the cast is not supporting the pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. This is not a political show. I am not at all equipped to comment on the many, many things at play here, but it's something regarding the movie, and I feel like it'd be weird if we didn't talk about it at all. But yeah, unless you suddenly apparently have a lot of knowledge about the situation in Hong Kong, Melvin, feel free to say something. But what's your take?
I think the most interesting thing about that is that we are seeing a lot of companies trying to appease the Chinese market by not saying anything that could restrict them from releasing films in China or products in China. I don't need to really mention these, but I could just say Google Blizzard and Hong Kong. You can Google ESPN and Hong Kong. You can Google now Disney and Hong Kong. Now, if you're in China, you're not going to find anything. I don't think I have any Chinese listeners, but you're not going to find anything just as much as you won't find anything about Tiananmen Square if you're in China. And there is a big question to sort of just linger on about what does it mean that capitalistic endeavors that are encouraged in the United States are manipulated by wanting to pursue capitalistic pursuits in China. I'm not really an overtly political guy. I'm overtly opinionated, but I'm not political. But in a philosophical sense, what does it mean for one country's free market to be affected by another country's restricted market? I don't know. I don't know what it means. But I do know that, like, we are living in a world where, at least in my generation, I sometimes think we wonder, like, do countries even matter? Like, the internet is filled with people where I communicate with anybody anywhere. And now companies are worried more about other places than they are their own regions and countries. And so that's like a dumb thought, I feel like, on my end. So I don't know. You can read all about this stuff. We don't really need to talk about it, but it is important to mention because our job with Syndoc is to kind of prepare you for things that are going on surrounding films, because a film is so much more than just a movie. It is people, it is culture, it is an expression of a philosophy or a worldview. And it is no mistake that there is nothing spiritual in this Mulan adaptation when you recognize that anything that features ghosts or spirits usually does not get shown in China. So that's kind of it. That's really all I can really say.
I mean, just two things. First off, unfortunately, just the nature of how the film industry works now is we might find ourselves having to comment on these types of things more and more, which, quite frankly, I cannot give you a compelling reason why you should listen to me or listen to Melvin or listen to really anyone. That's sort of the weird thing about the internet, which is like anybody with a platform can now comment on any issue, regardless of how unequipped or unqualified they are to talk about
Right.
something.
I mean, we're not authority figures. I just turned 24 and I'm hanging out in my apartment and my cat is in the other room because he meows too much. So like this is a no budget production, and Dan I just met online and we both love Christ and movies and we're like, let's just do this together. So like we have no authority. We just put the time out to put our voices on a platform and get scrutinized if we say something really bad. So
yeah, which I'm like, I'm expecting to get all kinds of responses if we sort of touch upon any issues involving politics or China or the very complicated like political quagmire that is China in general, actually. So, I mean, what does it mean to work with a government or a nation that possibly stands for things that are evil or wrong? And like, this has been the ongoing debate with Saudi Arabia, where like the WWE is coming under a lot of fire for putting shows on there. Like the first like two shows, the women weren't even allowed to go over and wrestle because you can't do that over there. And with China has sort of become sort of infamous as this nation that if you want to get your film released, you got to meet certain standards. Doctor Strange, they had to not include Tibet, which is like literally a huge part of Doctor Strange's origin because of that. When Bohemian Rhapsody is released over there, all references to Freddie Mercury, like Freddie Mercury's homosexuality, was edited out, which is a big part of Freddie Mercury's story. But, that's just how it is. And so, there's a lot coming out about China and their treatment of Christians and Muslims and, all those types of things, all things that are somewhat out of our reach. But at what point do we have to sort of address the elephant in the room where like by consuming products and by supporting companies that are doing these things, like how far does the blame tree go? Where like at what point do we as Christians have to start voting with our dollars and wallets versus like what difference does it make? Like,
And is this any different than Song of the South? I can't remember the specific actor's name. The black man who performs in that. He wasn't even allowed to go to the like premiere for the film because it was showing in a state that didn't allow black people to go to those theaters.
well,
So like
yeah, there you go.
this is not different at all. Like this is a film being tailored for a market that we really morally disagree with. And it's just we're just accepting that because right now culturally Disney can slyly do what it wants to make money.
Yeah. And I want to make it very clear. I want to make this very, very clear. My concerns are with the Chinese government, like not the people of China.
Right.
Like,
I think like I can't believe we weren't going to comment on now we're doing it. But like this is a human rights issue, not a political issue. Like these people are having their rights restricted. People are getting put in internment camps and like just vanishing in the middle of the night. This is like I don't like saying this is 1984 stuff, but this is literally Oceania 1984 stuff where like people are, if they have a wrong expression, they could probably get abducted in the middle of the night. And that's it. So like,
yeah.
it goes without saying that both of us we do not like the Chinese government. So let's just leave it that way.
If I'm misinformed about any of this stuff, and if there are people who will say that, like, you know what you're hearing is just, you know, American propaganda, like whatever, you know, fine. Like I'm just going to say this right now, and this is sort of going to be a thing for the rest of the podcast, for the rest of the time I do this. I'm going to probably mention this more often, but I'm open to being wrong about things. This is just my opinion right now at this moment that I'm speaking. An hour from now, some news story could break that totally changes my opinion on things. If I'm misinformed about anything, feel free to let me know, you know, on the Facebook group or on Twitter or whatever. But like, I am just some idiot, and this is just the information I have. And so I don't know. It's just, there's nothing we could really do about it. I'm not saying don't go see Mulan. I'm not saying that you can't. Like, there's this sort of there's this underlying other question, which is these films are not being made for the government; they're being made for the people of China. Like when the WWE performs in Saudi Arabia, that is for the people in Saudi Arabia. Why should the people who are under this repressive regime not be allowed to have entertainment? Isn't that just making things worse for the people that are there? Like, is those people's lives improved by not seeing a wrestling show? Are those people's lives improved by not being able to see a comic book movie or a Disney film? And that's another question. Like, I think it's more so, for me, the uncomfortableness comes from the fact that a regime that I have, I guess you could say, moral issues with is getting to alter the course of the creative decisions of people. You could say it's just in an attempt to play nice. This is no different than when, you know, diplomats and politicians debate and argue and try and come to concessions on things. As you've probably guessed from listening, we talk about this. These are topics that are far out of my depth to comment on. I don't know anything. I just, as I mentioned, this is all secondhand information that's being told to me. So Mulan is set to be released on March 27th, 2020, and is directed by New Zealand writer-director Nikki Caro, whose most recent work was The Zookeeper's Wife, though she's arguably best known for her critically acclaimed film Whale Rider. It is written by husband and wife writing duo Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver, who are best known for their work on the recent Planet of the Apes trilogy and Jurassic World. And finally, we move on to our final film, a much smaller film, a much creepier film, A Quiet Place Part 2. Following the deadly events at home, the Abbott family must now face the terrors of the outside world as they continue their fight for survival in silence. Forced to venture into the unknown, they quickly realize that the creatures that hunt by sound are not the only threats that lurk beyond the sand paths. This is a first for the show, as this isn't the official trailer. This is a teaser trailer. The official trailer is set to be released on New Year's Day. But considering that every other film on this episode has been a big franchise film, big effects film, big budget film, there's something nice about talking about a relatively small horror film. The teaser itself doesn't really show much. It just says Emily Blunt and her two kids, played by Millicent Simmons and Noah Jupe, walking on the sand path. And then they get to the end of the sand path, and then Emily Blunt steps off the sand path, and that's where the trailer cuts. I mean, there's not much to it, but it sort of really sets the tone for the film. The original film was great. I really liked The Quiet Place. I thought it was fun. It really had a great gimmick that they really fully realized through sound design and through atmosphere. I love the creature designs via industrial light and magic. And as far as the theater going experience goes, A Quiet Place was awesome. The theater I was in just was dead silent the entire time, and that's exactly what you want. There were apparently a good number of pitches for this film where people were sort of pitching more franchise-centric ideas for a sequel. However, according to writer and director John Krasinski, the studio rejected those ideas. It instead went with his idea, which was sort of a smaller idea set within this world. Cillian Murphy and Jaimon Hansu are also listed as actors, though on undisclosed roles. There's not much to go on here, but what do you think, Melvin? Do you think they should have just stopped at the original Quiet Place, and originally this was supposed to be just sort of a one-off film? Are you ready for a second visit to the Quiet Place?
I didn't like A Quiet Place, so I kind of wish they did just stop.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. I did like that, like, it's basically a normal movie, and then halfway in, the rest of the film is just like the third act. Like, it's just a weird movie where like the third act starts after like 30-40 minutes, and you still have like 40 minutes left in the movie. And you're like, okay, everything's going to be at like heightened levels of tension. But I think it's just the sort of film where the trailer was fantastic and everybody already likes Krasinski from The Office, if not is the only actor people know because of The Office. And so I get that a lot of people love it, and I think that's great. But to me, I just was very unimpressed, and my wife even more so. This was one of the first movies where she went, "Can I even just like movies anymore?" So I don't know. I'm glad to hear you enjoyed it though, and I'm assuming you're really excited for this next one though. But for me, I'm not in the same boat.
I don't know if really excited is the right word. I mean, that's kind of like my question is like, does everything need to be a franchise? I think it is one of those worlds where the instant you try to start exploring the rules and ideas and start doing more with it, I'm worried that the foundation isn't going to be there. Where when you try and expand the mythos, it ends up just sort of caving in on itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
eventually you're sort of left with either going in so far in a more ridiculous direction in order to accommodate the need for more sequels, or you overexpose your monsters. Anyone who's a horror fan who's followed a long running horror series can think of a million examples of what I'm talking about. You're Jason X, you're going to space, or your Army of Darkness, where you just have to keep going more absurd to the point of like almost like fantasy comedy or what have you. So, I mean, and to be clear, I enjoy both of those movies. I just don't know if A Quiet Place is the type of franchise that could withstand that kind of expansion. I mean, so I'm excited the idea of John doing a more smaller thing that's just like exploring another story somewhere else within this world. But I don't know. I miss the good old days of just leaving well enough alone, where you have a movie, it's good, people like it, and that's it. But I mean, all that said, if this is more born out of, hey, like Krasinski had another good idea he just wanted to do, and so, okay, why not have another one? I guess we'll know better once the full trailer drops. I know I have this tendency to say something and then clarify my own statements, like I'm afraid to make a solid statement in a direction, or I'm like, I'm not really excited, but maybe I am excited, who knows? But like, I really am in this case very mixed on A Quiet Place, where I like the first film fine. I think it's good. I'm not sure if I liked it enough, or I'm like, yeah, give me another one. Where I think it might be one of those things where I'm like, no, I'm full. I've had enough. I'm fine. So also, where's the baby?
Emily Blunt looks like she's carrying like a blanket that's rolled up, and so I'm like, okay, so it's the baby from American Sniper. And then
Yeah. Just a doll.
It looks so bad. Or one of the other characters I think was carrying a basket. I'm not sure.
A Quiet Place Part 2 is scheduled to be released on March 20th, 2020. Like the first one, it is written, directed, and produced by John Krasinski, who you may know from his ambitious directorial debut, Brief Interviews with Hideous Men, an adaptation of David Foster Wallace's short story collection, a book I highly recommend. He's also the current Jack Ryan and was in some sitcom or something. So, Melvin, which of these movies are you most excited about? Are there any you plan on seeing, don't plan on seeing, or just are undecided? This was a strangely negative episode. You seemed mostly unenthused about most of these movies. So, what do you think, Melvin?
So on our Facebook group, we have a couple different admins that run it. And like, I was just talking to one of them who posted something. I was like, hey, if you could just like not be so cynical, that would be really helpful. And then this literal episode is me just being cynical the entire time. So like,
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm trying to do here, guys. I don't know what I'm doing. Nobody knows what we're doing.
Yeah. You don't like James Bond. You're not a big Ghostbusters person. You don't want to see Black Widow or Wonder Woman. You didn't like A Quiet Place. That's kind of my main. That was my takeaway.
And Mulan is a dangerous film. That's literally.
Yeah, sure.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna see Black Widow, like I said. I don't know about James Bond, Ghostbusters Afterlife, Wonder Woman 1984. I don't know. It's just. There's a scene in The Office where like Dwight is making a joke about doing something, and then he just laughs and he says, "I'm just kidding. I don't know. The days are long. I think I'm just tired. And that's me right now. I think as ironic as that is, because like what, tomorrow is the shortest day of the year, where it's like it's
Yeah.
dark, it's light from what, like 9 o'clock to 3:30. Like I am in the position where the days are long and I'm just tired. And I think this episode has just shown like maybe I'm just out of the loop with all of what's popular right now. I'll tell you what I am excited for if I don't catch it before the year's end. A Hidden Life, Terrence Malick's new movie, is going to be showing in Philly, so maybe I'll go see that.
Is it really? Well, count yourself lucky. I mean, I'm pretty excited about Uncut Gems.
Yeah, there's tons of movies I'm excited. I'm still excited for Bombshell, Uncut Gems. I think there's a Netflix movie coming up that I want to see.
Cats,
dude, it's going to be surreal. I can't wait for
yeah,
it.
it's
Um,
look out, Star Wars. Yeah, I mean, like we talk about this more in the movie news segment, but like overall, I feel like there's been a lot of good films coming out. Like, you know, you had Knives Out, you had The Irishman, like Uncut Gems is coming out. Like, December has been a pretty good month for movies.
I can't keep up with it. I can't keep up with it. I haven't seen Queen and Slim yet, and it's all on a doomsday because Star Wars is going to come out and everything's going to get kicked out of the theater. I wanted to catch Ford v Ferrari, and like I just won't be able to see it. It's going to be gone.
Yeah, same. Yeah, no one saw Richard Jewell.
All of these great movies are gone because Star Wars is going to come in, disappoint everybody, and they're going to hate movies, and the film industry is going to crash. And I'm going to be like, guys, you should have gone and seen Waves. This is like an event film that no one's seeing. No wonder I'm tired and cynical, guys. I just can't do this anymore.
I think this is maybe getting a little off topic, but I think one of my big pet peeves is when people say something like, oh, there's never any good movies anymore. And it's just like, there is constantly movies coming out all the time. It's like, if anything, we live in a time where there's too many.
There are more movies coming out than the MPA can rate.
Yes.
They actually have not rated as many movies lately because they're also having more difficulty rating films.
The problem is that like the average person is only going to go see a couple movies a year, and they're going to see big event movies. And now a lot of the big event movies are more like samey than I think they were in the past, where like if you only see like 4 movies and you like comic book movies, guess what? You saw Spider-Man, Captain Marvel, and both Avengers movies. You know what I mean? Like that's all you can afford to see, especially if you have a family and you're gonna take a couple people to see movies, and you maybe you're not the person who will sit down and watch something on Netflix or Hulu or whatever. So it's like, it's not that there's not that no good movies don't come out anymore, or that there just aren't as many movies coming out. It's just that more people are just, when they're thinking about what to spend money on, they're just choosing to go see more event films. So it's just like, no, there's like, here's an exercise. I don't know if I've ever said this on the podcast before, but like go to like a website like Box Office Mojo or Rotten Tomatoes or any site that like lists upcoming films and just look at what's opening this weekend. There's going to be probably like 10 or 15 movies. You know, they're just maybe not coming out in a theater near you, or they're just not movies. If you're relying only on advertisements and not like just keeping the loop of what's coming out, then yeah, sure. But there's plenty of stuff coming out all the time. It's just that like, we see this now when we're doing this show where like we have to talk about things that people want to like listen to us talk about, because there are like plenty of trailers that came out this month, but it's just like we're sitting there like, well, we gotta talk about Black Widow, we gotta talk about Wonder Woman, we gotta talk about James Bond, we gotta talk about Ghostbusters. No one's gonna click on this if we're talking about like a Boss or like the Three Christs or something, you know what I mean? Like no one's gonna watch trailers for that. Or I think there is a new Grudge movie, right? And I wrote that down as a possible trailer.
Yeah, that trailer came out too. And I think it's got what's his name, who busted his arm and now Cowboy Bebop was pushed back. I forget his name.
Taika Waititi.
Oh no. yes, it was Taika Waititi. No. So thanks for listening to our most cynical episode so far.
For the record, I'm mostly positive on most of these movies, to be honest. There's a difference between like hype and excitement, and man, I can't wait for it to come out. Like I feel towards something, like I felt that towards The Lighthouse. I feel that now for the Uncut Gems, versus something I'm like, that looks okay, like that looks decent. Like I don't know. It's for me, it's more just a question of like time. Like what do I want to dedicate my time and money towards now, versus like that will definitely be on streaming at some point. So I don't know if I want to see that in theaters. That's a real question. Like, are you going to see this in theaters versus are you just going to wait for it to come out on streaming or something? Because eventually you have to see Wonder Woman. You have to see Black Widow.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Trailer Talk. If you'd like to watch any of the trailers we've talked about, check the show notes for a direct link to cinematicdoctrine.com, where we've compiled each trailer in an easy, simple format. If you'd like to support the show, head on over to Patreon, and for as little as $3 a month, you can influence the show. Or don't. That's cool too. We're just glad you're here. If you'd like to follow Dan on Twitter, follow him at TomRonda1. That's an H after the R. All of this will be available in the show notes. Until next time, stay cool. Want some Cinematic Doctrine swag? You're in luck! We've got 3-inch Cinematic Doctrine logo stickers exclusive for Patreon supporters. Perfect for your travel mug or laptop. Head over to patreon.com/Cinematic Doctrine, link in the show notes, and choose the Independent Theater tier. Doing so will net you other perks too. But let's be real, the podcast stickers are the coolest perk. So get yourself some podcast stickers by supporting on Patreon.